Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Ridenauer, and we have a very, very good episode in front of us. We've got a lot to cover again today on the show. There have been some major moves being made again, and some offseason kind of signings, and some new free agency pickups, and so on and so forth. And there's been some rumors also starting to bubble up to the surface. But before we dive into the show, I hope everyone's been doing well. I'm sure it's been nice to get the groove after the holidays and really get back in the normal swing of things, as they say. I'm actually back to working slowly but surely. I have a PA announcing job, public address announcer, if anybody was wondering if it's PA for Pennsylvania or whatever. So I have been, back doing games here and there, and then obviously podcasting a whole bunch. So hoping to get back into some commentating sooner rather than later whenever things start to ease up with the virus. But in all honesty, you never know these days. But getting into this show, we have a ton to cover. So I want to go over first and get right into with really all of this latest news that's been going on and all the stuff that's been going around the league, and discuss what recent signing might have shaken things up even more in a certain division. After I get into some news and really kick that off, I'll discuss what division I think will be better in the NL this year, the NL West or the NL East. I'll share my thoughts on the two divisions after the increase in talent that has really come into both divisions, and highlight some players that I think will make major differences in the division. Later on, I'll get into which players right now could be some major trade pieces for this offseason and going into this upcoming season. I'll share my players who I think will be on the move before the end of the offseason and by the time opening day comes around, and really share what teams they could really see themselves on, and how they could possibly be a great fit for some of these new ball clubs that they could find themselves on. And be sure to stick around for the final few minutes of the show today, as I'll dive into another Buy It or Deny It segment, where I will buy or deny the claim that we will see over half of the MLB teams this summer allow fans at games during the season at some point or another. As things with the vaccine and COVID continue to hang in the balance, and things being so certain each day, we really have no idea. So I'll get into that segment here in just a little while. But I want to dive into probably the most recent, or at least the biggest, most recent news in baseball, which is former Chicago Cubs slugger Kyle Schwarber. He's been signed by the Washington Nationals for a one-year, $10 million deal. And honestly, again, the Nationals are making some major moves. And I know, going back a couple weeks ago, GM Mike Rizzo had mentioned that he wanted to find heavy power-hitting bats to really complement that middle of the lineup. And he did just that. Right before Christmas, they go get Josh Bell, and then just recently they add Kyle Schwarber, who, as we all know, was non-tendered by the Chicago Cubs back in, I believe, November. So he's been a free agent for a little while, finally got picked up. Pretty hefty deal for 1 year, I'd have to say. I mean, the Nationals are a higher payroll team for the most part, middle of the road to higher payroll team. So I'm not shocked that he's getting that much money. But at the same time, $10 million for a guy that's coming off a year where he was really, really bad, I don't really know if that's worth it, but it could also turn out to be in the Nationals' favor. I mean, they've done this before. They've gone out and gotten veterans or guys that were still good, but they were past a little bit of their peak. I'm not saying Kyle Schwarber's past his peak. He might have not even touched his peak yet, and he's still played pretty solid so far in his MLB career. But they're very good at finding kind of these hidden gems, if you will, of players that, again, are almost forgotten about or kind of in the back shelf, and they come to Washington and all of a sudden they're a difference maker. I mean, look at Howie Kendrick a couple of years ago. Howie Kendrick was a very good baseball player throughout his entire career, and when he went to the Nationals, he was on the tail end of his career. He was still very productive, though, and he clearly proved it, and he was a major reason why they went to the World Series and won it. He was a huge piece of that. And I think it's very wise the Nationals are continuing to do this kind of this process, if you will, of finding these, again, almost forgotten superstars. Because in all honesty, if they had not gone out and gotten any more power hitting, it would have been a struggle for them, because outside of Soto and Turner on their team, the rest of the lineup and the rest of the team, they combined for a 245 average and a dismal 695 OPS. So clearly they needed to bolster the hitting, because outside of Turner and Soto, that's really all they had. Now, Schwarber has a higher strikeout rate, I would say, and his fielding is not great, but he can still be a ginormous power bat in the middle of the lineup. Again, take some of the pressure off of Soto, off of Turner, and he can tally a lot of home runs. I mean, he had 38 in 2019. He had 93 RBIs. And in all honesty, the Nationals just really upped their power numbers, I think, because between Bell and Schwarber in 2019, they had a combined total of 75 homers and over 200 RBIs between the two. And the Nationals, again, are really looking to try and upgrade this lineup, and I think they did. I definitely think that this was a big-time move that they needed to make, because I don't know if just Bell would have done it. I think that if they had just Soto, Turner, and Bell, it probably would have made things still a little bit challenging on opposing pitchers, but not as challenging as it is now with having 4 legitimate bats in the lineup, and and you can really play around with that lineup. You can spread that out in any sort of fashion you want. Put Schwarber in the 7-hole, put Bell in the 5-hole, Soto in the 3-hole, and lead off with Turner, kind of stagger them out, something like that. But I think this is going to be a force to be reckoned with in the NL and the NL East. And as we know, the NL has really started to kind of up its talent pool. I mean, the Padres went out and got Snell and Darvish, and then the Mets recently trading for Francisco Lindor. Now the Nationals picking up Schwarber and Bell. So I think the Nationals are going to be a team that could push the Mets, and we also forget about the Atlanta Braves in that NL East. Who knows what's going to happen with them? I mean, they haven't made any ginormous pickups. Obviously, Charlie Morton was a major sign for them. But if Marcell Ozuna doesn't come back, I still could see the Braves hanging in there as kind of that 3 top-tier teams in the NL East. But with what the Nationals have added and with what the Mets have added, I think it's going to be really hard for them to kind of go toe-to-toe with the Nationals and Mets. I think the Braves are going to have a tough time. But at the same time, it's the Atlanta Braves. They're a very good winning ball club. They know how to win games. They've got the reigning NL MVP on their team. They've got one of the best up-and-coming pitchers in Max Fried on their team. So they still have a lot of weapons, and that, I think, is the thing. The Braves didn't really need to add a whole lot because they're already set, whereas the Nationals, they definitely needed to add a lot, and the Mets, they needed to add some here and there. The one thing I'm concerned about the Nationals is whether or not they'll have healthy pitching, because the hitting can only do so much. If the pitching is not healthy, so Strasburg, Scherzer, Patrick Corbin, if they're not healthy this year, I think it's going to be kind of a waste again for these guys that they just picked up and signed. Now, Schwarber is going to be interesting to see where they stick him in the field. If the universal DH, which again, as of right now, there's not going to be one, but I believe they're still having discussions and meetings about what rules from 2020 could be carried over into 2021, and this is one of them. And if that is the case, we could see Kyle Schwarber moved over to DH. Josh Bell's over at first. Obviously, Soto's in the outfield and Turner's at short. So it would be very interesting to see kind of where they move Schwarber around, and if there's no universal DH, you're probably just going to have to put him in the outfield. You have no other choice. Now, obviously, kind of a liability, but to have his bat in the lineup, it's a sacrifice that I would be willing to make as a manager. But this NL East has, I think, become that much better in the matter of 4 weeks. So I'm really excited to watch how this NL East is. And again, I'm going to get into my, which is better, NL East and NL West segment here in just a little bit. So I'll unpack a little bit more of like who's in what division and what players really to look for, and who's going to be the players that are going to make one of these divisions the better division in baseball. But again, big sign by the Nationals. But there's still a lot of different free agents that have yet to be signed. I mean, before we figure out where these players are going and such, we really have to kind of see where, all of these free agents are going to sign. But we have to know also, before we figure out where they're going to go, when the season is going to start. And because of this pandemic and because of COVID and because of the virus, Rob Manfred has actually recently said that he's planning on starting spring training on time this year, and that teams could be and should be prepared for a 162-game season. So I think this is a very interesting development here. I was reading this story the other day on Bleacher Report, and apparently the Players Association, they were a major piece in this because they really fought back the pushing back of the start date. And I guess going into it, Rob Manfred had, or at least some of the MLB representatives had mentioned that they should push the start date back to the season, or the start date of the season back a little bit. The MLBPA, the Players Association, said no, because this is what was really interesting. Last year, the players only made 37% of their total salary that they would have made on their game salary. So they made only 37% of what they were expected to make. They wanted 100% of what they were expected to make this year. So that's why they wanted to start the season on time. They don't have to make up for lost time. They don't have to make up for lost money. And they're going to just say, hey, we're starting on time. We're rolling through. And right as of now, spring training is set for both in Arizona and Florida for February 17th. So just about a month away or so for players to report. Now, it's going to be very interesting this season because, again, we've got so many different factors. And again, I'm going to get into this in a little while in my last segment, but how many people are going to get vaccinated? Is the vaccine going to be issued to everybody? Are there going to be fans in the stands? How are the quarantining and social distancing protocols going to be implemented by the MLB to the players? I mean, we've seen it right now with other leagues. Other leagues are starting to have, I mean, the NBA has started to have issues with it, and that could be, the fate that baseball has. I mean, I think that for the most part, baseball was the guinea pig this past summer in how to go about playing amid a pandemic. They were really the first team to do that, or the first sport to do that. And so I think that they are going into this with a mindset of, okay, we've gone through this before, we've done it before, we know what to do, we can make up for our mistakes in the past, but we're not going to start this season late. We're starting it on time. And I think that it's a very, wise move on the players' part to, if they want the pay that they want, they should be, given the pay that they deserve. Because if they're going out there and if they're risking their health and if they're risking their family's health and really everybody else, they should be paid in full compensation, in my opinion. I think that is kind of how it should work, because if you're risking your, personal health, you should be fairly paid for that. Now, the biggest questions that, again, kind of going back to what will happen if there's multiple outbreaks or whatever, what are they going to do about games? Games this past year, I mean, we saw teams that weren't even completing an entire season. Are we going to have that? I mean, imagine that on a 60-game schedule, but imagine teams not finishing out in a full 162-game schedule in a full 162-game season. So you've got teams that might miss 30 or 40 games. Who knows? And then all of a sudden they're only playing 120 games. You've got teams that are playing 150 games, and then that's going to make other issues come up. Well, this guy's playing way more. They're getting paid more because they're having more games. Our games keep... And in all honesty, the players might go into this thinking, okay, if we can stay strict, we'll be able to get paid for the games that we're playing. And if we start this on time, then we can, roll through the whole season, try as best as we can, but also capitalize on this so we can, try and make some money back, because everybody lost a lot of money this past year. So I think that ultimately Rob Manfred has to take a firmer stance on things. He can't be kind of nonchalant. I felt like he was very just lackadaisical this past summer, allowing the MLB teams to kind of do what they want. I mean, Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, he has just implemented new, very, very, very strict protocols, and I think that he has handled this the best out of all the commissioners. So I think that Rob Manfred needs to pay attention to how other leagues are going about this, because I just really do question whether or not allowing teams to kind of just govern themselves is a wise move, because some of these teams are going to be in states where it's okay to go outside without a mask on, for example, in Miami or in Tampa. And so then you're going to run into issues like that, and then they go and play a team that might be, very strict in protocol, say, like here in Pennsylvania, the Pittsburgh Pirates or the Philadelphia Phillies. That's where you run into that problem. And I think that if there's a overall blanketed theme of, okay, this is what we're going to do, this is the standard, and this is how we're going to go about it, and if you step out of line, you will be punished drastically, that's how I think it should be done. But Rob Manfred's kind of leaving it up to the teams, and I just really question whether or not that's a good idea. But ultimately, it's good to hear that baseball should be starting on time this year. Hopefully the season does start on time, but regardless, the season starting has to occur, because the White Sox are a team I really want to watch this year, especially with the recent move they made in signing former Athletics reliever Liam Hendriks to a 3-year, $54 million deal. And honestly, Hendriks was on just about every single MLB journalist list as one of the top, if not the top reliever in free agency this year, especially in this offseason. I mean, he was one of the best reliever free agents. Him, Brad Hand, just a couple guys to name that were major factors for their respective teams. He was an All-Star in 2019. He actually is coming off a year where he won the Mariano Rivera American League Reliever of the Year. He posted a 1.78 ERA in 25 and a third innings. He had a 40.2% strikeout rate. For a reliever, that is alarmingly high. So I think the White Sox have really addressed their pitching needs, right? They've gone out. They already had the hitting. They already had that all figured out, and I think that it was wise that they went out and got, some veteran starting pitching. We go back to Lance Lynn, and now they go out and get some veteran relief pitching in Liam Hendricks. And his name actually had been floated around the White Sox in previous months. So this is not, I mean, it is huge news, but again, it's not, I don't think, as shocking. He's only 31, too, so he's got a lot of time ahead of him, and he's had back-to-back seasons with a sub-2 ERA, so he's on a good uptick right now. He's on a good career trend currently. He had a career-high 124 strikeouts in 2019, and it's already a very strong bullpen that he's joining. I mean, they're one of the best teams in save percentages. They're one of the best teams at limiting inherited runs scored, so this is going to be a really, really deadly bullpen for people to have to go through. But I'm curious what this might mean for Alex Colon. I mean, he's a free agent. He's been one of the major relievers, at times been a closer for the White Sox. And now if he resigns, I think that this is just going to absolutely skyrocket the White Sox into where they could be, because he's a very, very good relief guy. He's great in that 6, 7, 8 innings. Same thing with Hendricks. And if you've got two different guys that are able to come in, shut down innings efficiently and shut down teams efficiently that late in the ballgame, and you've got two of them, that's going to be a really hefty bullpen to get through. And Chicago, they've got this small window. They, I think, are aware that, they've got X amount of time to have with these players, Tim Anderson, Jose Abreu, Eloy Jimenez, Nick Madrigal, Yohan Moncada, all of these guys, Yasmani Grandal, all of these guys, they're at times ticking. Some of these guys are getting older, some of these guys are getting younger and getting better, and they might wind up leaving when their contract is up. So Chicago sees this time as an opportunity to strike. And I think it's very wise that they've been aggressive this offseason. I think they've actually been one of my favorite teams to watch in their progression this offseason. I mean, they also went out and got Adam Eaton, so they've gotten some nice pieces, and I have a lot of high hopes for the White Sox this year. If they can figure it out somehow, some way, and if they cannot end up on a disappointing note like they did last year, I think that this is going to be a really good season for the Chicago White Sox. Now, there's been some other baseball news recently which involves sports gambling, actually. It's the Washington Nationals. Again, we're kind of circling back to the Nats. They've announced that they will be opening the first sports betting book at an MLB stadium, as they'll be partnering with BetMGM, and this is, I think, groundbreaking in my opinion. I mean, we all know how much sports betting and sports gambling has come in the news in recent years because of the legalization of it in many different states. And as time goes on and it continues to get legal, you're going to start seeing more and more stadiums having sports betting books and having counters where you can go and place bets. And it's very interesting what this kind of setup is going to be. Basically, fans will be able to bet from their seats, and they can also bet from an app as well. So you'll be able to download an app. You can basically just place your live bets in the middle of the game while you're at the game. And they'll have betting kiosks and windows to place bets. Totally new. Again, I mean, the MLB actually made a deal with MGM Resorts in 2018 to kind of change that perception of gambling on sports. I think they were the first major professional sports league to do that. And I think other teams are going to slowly start adding, these kiosks and these booths as time goes on. D.C. has really become kind of a main hubbub of this. I mean, Capital One Arena in D.C., where the Capitals and the Wizards play, they actually have their own betting kiosk and stand for themselves as well. So this is not a new thing in Washington, D.C. Now, in the baseball world, it is a little new, but ultimately, I think that this is a very wise move by the MLB, a great opportunity for them to make a lot of money back. I mean, hey, we all know how much money they lost this past summer, only playing 100 games less, 100 more games less than they normally do. So this is a very wise move, I think, by the MLB. It's going to be also interesting to see kind of how it becomes normalized. How does it become an everyday thing to see in an MLB or an NBA or NFL or NHL stadium where you can just, who knows if they'll have people coming down the aisles and taking bets and placing bets and collecting bets, whatever they might be doing. I think it's going to be very interesting. We might, when we go back to seeing live sporting events, whenever that might be, I think we're going to see some new changes, again, with a lot of different kind of aspects to that live, game day experience as the fan. But I think that we're going to see, a lot more just excitement out of fans. Obviously, you're going to have a lot more passion. You might see a little bit more anger out of fans during games because, gambling, that really gets people going sometimes. But again, this is definitely going to become more and more of a regular thing. I mean, the Tigers, I believe, they made a deal with PointsBet. I'm not quite sure what they're going to be doing in the future with that, but I'm just curious to see how quickly it expands, what team is going to be next, and then also how does it filter into other sports? How does it filter into other leagues? Because, again, this is a fairly new thing to have happen in our society with sports gambling since it was illegal. Now it becoming illegal or becoming legalized a little bit more and more. It's going to become more and more accepted. So I'm very curious to see how that it is. And I'm not a big gambler. I've always joked around and said, yeah, I might toss $1 here or $1 there. That's all I would really do because I think the fun thing of gambling is being able to be so in-depth on that game or on that team, and you know so much about how many times this team has won on this team's turf and this, that, and the other. And that's what really excites me. Again, as a journalist, that's very intriguing. But the idea of throwing money, I'm not a huge fan of it. But I have a lot of friends that do it. They love it, and it seems exciting, but I could never be one that puts down massive bets. I could not do that. $1 here, $1 there, that's fine. But again, very interesting, and I think it's definitely going to revolutionize the sporting event and just kind of the live sporting event experience for fans everywhere in all sports. So that'll do it for us in this first segment, but don't go anywhere because when I get back from the commercial, I'm going to take a deep dive into which division in the NL is going to be better this season, the NL East or the NL West. Folks, stay right there. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA, to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenour with you all, and in our first segment, I got right into some of the latest news in the baseball world and discussed a recent free agency signing that could really change things in one division. Be sure to stick around for the final segment today as I'll get back into my buy it or deny it segment, discussing whether or not I buy or deny the claim that over 50% of teams in baseball will have fans in their stadiums this season. But sticking in this segment, I want to get into discussing which division in the NL has recently become the best one, I would say, the NL East or the NL West. And as we know, my last episode I got into this a little bit, the NL Central is in big-time disarray with just the financial hits and the financial losses of the pandemic, and there are already teams that really rely on stadium attendance and gate attendance and sales in the stadium, so they're not going to be great. We all know the NL East and the NL West are going to be really good because the NL East, they've just seen recent ads of Josh Bell, Kyle Schwarber, Francisco Lindor, Carlos Carrasco to their respective teams in those divisions. The NL West has also seen ads with Blake Snell, Yu Darvish, but then they already have very talented players with a lot of skill. So, before I would say, here's how I would look at it, right? The NL West clearly last year, in my opinion, was the best division in the NL and arguably in baseball. You could probably make a legitimate argument for that. The NL East was still pretty good. I think that they were kind of wishy-washy because, you had the Braves and then the Mets were okay and then the Marlins it was a lot of it was a good team and then a lot of okay teams. Whereas the NL Central, it was the Cubs were okay in all honesty last year. They weren't great. They did win a lot, but again, I don't know how much competition they really ran into. And then they had 2 or 3 subpar teams and then 2 bad teams. So, in all honesty, the NL West was clearly the dominator, and there was no way that you could probably have said the NL East or NL Central were better, because the Dodgers and the Padres, again, they really set the tone in talent, and then you also have to factor in the Rockies. I mean, you've got Charlie Blackmon and Trevor Story. The Giants have good pieces. The Diamondbacks, they're okay. They don't have as many talented players, I feel, as opposed to the Dodgers and the Padres, but still, it's a pretty dense division to try and get through, and with this offseason, I think immediately we all kind of thought, okay, the Padres are making a push for Snell and Darvish. The NL West is going to be even better this year. But again, now we've got Bell, now we've got Schwarber going into the NL East, and then also Lindor and Carrasco. And I know Carrasco's kind of, I don't want to say the loose end of all of that, because when you say Josh Bell and Kyle Schwarber and Francisco Lindor, you think, oh wow, those are some really, solid hitters. Francisco Lindor is one of the best hitting shortstops in baseball currently. Carlos Carrasco is no bench warmer himself. I mean, he's a very good pitcher. He's coming off a really great year, had a sub-3 ERA, so the guy's talented. And, I mean, the year before, he was battling leukemia, and then he comes back this year and has an unbelievable season. So the guy is a fighter, and he's going to fight tooth and nail on anything and everything. So I think the Mets got a really big pickup there. Not to mention the Mets have also picked up James McCann, and he's a former All-Star as well. So things have really, I think, changed in terms of top-level divisions because the Dodgers haven't really made any major moves. They've re-signed Blake Trinan. Justin Turner, he's still a free agent. Kike Hernandez, he's a free agent. They've already got everybody set on their team, so they don't really have to do anything. But also, back going to the NL East, the Braves did add Charlie Morton earlier in the offseason. But again, I think that overall, if you look at the pitching in the two divisions, I would say that the NL East is a little bit more inferior in pitching because in the NL West, you've got Blake Snell, you've got Yu Darvish, you've got Dinelson Lamet, you've got Clayton Kershaw, Zach Gallen, who's going to be a really good pitcher in just a few years. You've got Walker Buehler, you've got David Price, and then coming out of the bullpen, you've got Kenley Jansen. You've got some serious arms on those teams, and they're all top-tier pitchers in their own rights. Now, over on the NL East, you've got Jacob deGrom and Noah Syndergaard, obviously, and then for the Nationals, you've got Steven Strasburg and Patrick Corbin, Max Scherzer, Charlie Morton, Max Fried. But then after that, you're kind of like, okay, who else is there, right? I mean, I don't think that Aaron Nola on the Phillies has really got anything left in him. I mean, he's getting kind of older. I don't think that Sixto Sanchez is going to be a really good pitcher. I don't know if he's there quite yet. But I think that the NL West definitely, I think, has the heavier pitching, right? And especially with the fact that Scherzer's been injury-prone, Strasburg's been injury-prone, sure, Kershaw's been injury-prone as well. But in terms of guys that are still in their prime and still kind of in that level of play where they're some of the top-tier pitchers, I think the NL West is one in that one. But in terms of just skill players and overall players, it's pretty dead even, if you ask me. I mean, the NL does have some serious power hitters in, Pete Alonso. He belted 50-plus homers not too long ago. And then other guys like Juan Soto. You've got Josh Bell, Freddie Freeman, reigning NL MVP, Bryce Harper. They are some of the best power guys in baseball. And then obviously in the West, you've got Cody Bellinger, Fernando Tatis, Manny Machado, Trevor Story. Charlie Blackmon, I'd put there, but again, he's not a big slugger. I don't think of him as a huge power hitter. Same thing with Mookie Betts. I don't think of Mookie Betts as a huge power hitter. I think Mookie Betts is just a great overall hitter. I don't think he's a very good, necessarily just strict power hitter. And so I think that the NL West, they don't have, I think, the power that the NL East does in terms of just home run hitters, guys that are going to belt 30-plus homers, just bombs after bombs after bombs. Not to mention, I'm forgetting about Kyle Schwarber in the NL East also, as he was just added too, and James McCann. So we also have to factor in those guys, right? And I'm not going to lie, depending on what JT Realmuto does, that could really be kind of the swing in which way people might look at these two divisions, because JT Realmuto is the best catcher in baseball. And if you look at the NL West, they don't have anybody that I would say behind the backstop that is light years. Buster Posey, yeah, but who knows if he's going to play this year? And who knows where he's at in terms of his career and his talent, because he's coming off a year where, 2019 was his worst career year. He sits out 2020, so it's not going in a good direction for Buster Posey. Will Smith will be good eventually. I will give him that. And Austin Nola is good too. He's still young. But over in the NL East, if you've got James McCann and you've got JT Realmuto, those are two of the best catchers in baseball in the same division. So I would definitely have to say that in that term, the NL East definitely has them beat. But, the overall players, I'll just list a couple guys from the NL East and the NL West that really stand out to me and kind of just decipher who's going to be the better of the two. So I would have to say, first and foremost, Bryce Harper, obviously. You got JT Realmuto, Alec Baum, Rhys Hoskins, Juan Soto, Steven Strasburg, Max Scherzer, Trey Turner, Josh Bell, Francisco Lindor, Pete Alonso, Jeff McNeil, Dominic Smith, Noah Syndergaard, Jacob deGrom, Max Fried, Ronald Acuna Jr., Ozzie Albies, Michael Conforto, I mean, Kyle Schwarber. I mean, Kyle Schwarber. I didn't even name him, and he's just recently been in the NL East. So there's a lot of guys in this division that are serious hitters. I mean, Alec Baum and Rhys Hoskins, they're going to become two of the better power hitters eventually. JT Realmuto, again, one of the best catchers, if not the best catcher in baseball. Then you've got Juan Soto. You've got guys like Pete Alonso, two of the best up-and-coming power hitters in their own respective rights. Max Fried, one of the best up-and-coming pitchers. And then, in all honesty, the Braves are just chock full of young talent. Ronald Acuna Jr., Ozzie Albies. Dansby Swanson had a really good year this past season. So the NL East, they're secretly, I think that people don't realize they are loaded with talent. And if the Phillies can, again, re-sign JT Realmuto, and if they can go out and get a solid shortstop, I think that this is going to be a really, really tough division, tougher than I think people might give it credit for, because we all kind of look at the Padres and the big blockbuster moves they've made, but we forget about who's in the NL East still. And, I mean, I go back to Francisco Lindor. He's arguably been the best hitting shortstop since 2015 in baseball. I mean, he leads all shortstops in home runs, extra base hits, and total bases since 2015. Four-time All-Star. He's been a Gold Glover. He's been a Silver Slugger. The guy can do it all. He can field. He can hit. He can run. He can throw. He literally can do it all. So when you've got that many versatile players, I think it's really hard to kind of rule out the idea of they're the best division in the league. Now, over in the NL West, though, you still have Fernando Tatis and Cody Bellinger, obviously. Mookie Betts, who is arguably one of the best, if not the best, outfielders in baseball. Clayton Kershaw and Walker Buehler. Corey Seager, Manny Machado, Will Myers, Jake Cronenworth, Blake Snell, Yu Darvish, and then Trevor Story, Charlie Blackmon, Nolan Arenado, who, again, I think a lot of people forget that he's in that division as well, Ketel Marte, Mike Yastrzemski, and Trent Grisham. Now, I will say this. The last two, Yastrzemski and Trent Grisham, I'm not sold on them, but I'm not sold on them, if that makes sense. I like Mike Yastrzemski. I think he's getting a little bit older. He actually made his MLB debut at a much older age than normal. And Trent Grisham, I think, is slowly going to become a really good player as time goes on. I mean, he had a little bit of a hiccup in Milwaukee. He comes back to San Diego, has a really, really good season. Charlie Blackmon, again, is another guy that I don't think of as a major power hitter, but he's just a solid, really good professional hitter. And then we also have to remember that, there's the Diamondbacks are, I think, the big weak link here, right? And I think the Marlins and the NL East are the big weak link where they don't have a whole bunch of talent, right? Ketel Marte is really the only name that's going to jump out at you between those two teams. Then you look at kind of the second to last teams in those divisions, if you will. I would probably right now say the Phillies would be that in the NL East, and I would probably say the Giants are that right now, or maybe the Rockies in the NL West. And, the Rockies, they've got, again, Blackmon, Story, they've got Arenado. But then after that, I mean, who else do you have, right? I mean, you don't have, the pitching's not good. The pitching is atrocious, actually. And outside of Zach Gallen on the Diamondbacks, there's no other real good pitcher. So you've got two teams that don't have really any pitching. It's really just the Padres and the Dodgers. I mean, even the Giants don't have any pitching. Whereas the NL East, you've got Noah Syndergaard and Jacob deGrom on the Mets. Then you've got Charlie Morton and you've got Max Fried and Ian Anderson on the Braves. And then on the Nationals, you've got Steven Strasburg, Max Scherzer, and Patrick Corbin. So although the talent-wise, in terms of just the pound-for-pound talent might go in favor of the NL West in pitching, I think the number of talented pitchers in the NL East is higher. So I'll give the NL West, they probably would beat them out in the pitching department. But in terms of overall play, I think it's pretty even. I mean, in all honesty, the NL East, they have them beat, I think, just a tad, just a little bit, because the NL East now has, again, three teams that will be legitimate this year, the Mets, the Nats, and the Braves. The NL West, they don't really have that, right? I mean, they've got the Padres and the Dodgers, but the Giants and the Rockies and the Diamondbacks, they still have a lot to prove. The Diamondbacks are coming off a year where they were not good. The Rockies saw one of the worst turnarounds in a season. I mean, going from first to worst in a matter of weeks. And then all you have after that is the Giants. And I think the Giants will be good in 2022, 2023, because they've got a lot of free agents in this coming off season in 2021. And so I think that they're going to go out, get some big pieces. I mean, Brandon Crawford, he's going to be free agent in 2022. Brandon Belt, Jeff Samardzij's contract is up. So they're going to have a lot of new guys on this team in 2022, 2023. And I think that until then, can't really say that the NL West is the better division. I'm going to have to actually say the NL East is the better division. Definitely not only, team-wise, I would say maybe the NL West just because the Padres and the Dodgers are so good, and it's really just been the Nationals and the Braves that have seemed to prove anything, and the Mets still have to prove something. But they have made a bigger push towards that idea of proving people wrong more than I would say the Giants. I would kind of compare, in the NL East you've got the Braves, and then the NL West you've got the Dodgers, and then you've got the Nationals in the East, and you've got the Padres in the West. And then that third team, you go to the Mets, and then you go to the Giants. The Mets really have made some great moves, like I keep saying. And so I think that the Mets have, again, that slight edge over that third team, and that kind of gives me that reason why I'm going to go with the NL East, because that third team in that division, in those divisions, is just a hair higher than the NL West is, because they've gone out, they've gotten Francisco Lindor, they've got a 2-time Cy Young Award winner. The Giants have not had players like that in many years, right? And a lot of the guys that they still have on those World Series teams where they had the Chin Lincecums, they had, Pablo Sandoval was really good when Buster Posey was in his prime. They're a shell of their former selves, but I think that they can get back to that with all of these free agents and all of this turnover that they're going to experience eventually, because they do, it's an ideal place to play. Obviously, it's a tough division. It's going to be competitive. So you're going to have, and if they can sign some decent guys, they're going to be able to make a run at things. They can convince guys and players, hey, come to our team. Although the NL West is tough, we can make a serious run at it if you're on our team. And I think, not to mention, San Francisco is a high payroll team, so they're going to be able to pay a lot of guys a lot of different kinds of money. And as a result, I wouldn't be shocked if we saw some major names in 2021 kind of go there, especially with the shortstop position slowly but surely going to be freed up, with Brandon Crawford going to be a free agent eventually. There's going to be a lot of free agent shortstops next year. Carlos Correa, you've got Trevor Story, Javi Baez, Francisco Lindor, unless he signs a large deal with the Mets, which is rumored to happen, but who knows if that will actually happen. So you've got 4 or 5 really legitimate good gloves and bats that the Giants could pick from. And in all honesty, I could see them stealing Trevor Story maybe from their, cross-division rival in the Rockies. A lot of different things can happen, but I'm going to go with the NL East. I think that they're the better division as of right now. Again, early on, we haven't seen either one of these teams or either one of these leagues play. We haven't seen any of these new players play on these new teams. So there's a lot of things still to get figured out, but I would ultimately have to swing with the NL East. And again, we still have a lot to go. Who knows where some of these other big-time free agents go, and they could really be a huge swing for some of these teams and for some of these divisions. Guys like DJ LeMahieu, if they wind up on the Dodgers, which is, again, a rumored thing to have happen, then all of a sudden the Dodgers could be back in that, the NL West could be back in that conversation of best division, because DJ LeMahieu's that good. Now, who knows where George Springer might go? Who knows where Trevor Bauer? Trevor Bauer's rumored to go with the Mets, and if that happens, I would say they're the clear-cut favorite, because think of all the Cy Young winners they've got in the NL East between Scherzer and Strasburg never won one, but Scherzer, DeGrom, Bauer. I think that they would definitely make some serious headway in the major leagues for sure, because that would be a really, really hard division, especially with Trevor Bauer being there with Jacob DeGrom and Noah Syndergaard. But ultimately, I'm going to go NL East. I think they're both really good, and I think they're both going to be probably the top 2 divisions in all of baseball this year, unless the AL East comes out of nowhere and does something spectacular. But that will close things out here for us in our second segment on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. After the commercial, I'm going to share which players I think will be the next to be traded from their respective teams and to what teams they may get traded to as well. It's been a lot of fun so far, folks, but we got a lot more to go, so don't change that channel. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Great to have you all here still with me today. Jack Ridenauer again. And in the last segment, I got right into sharing which division I think is now the better division, I would say, in the NL East or the NL West. But I want to now switch gears a little bit and get into which players I think could be the next ones to be on the trading block and could potentially be on the move before the season even starts. There's been a lot of names thrown out there. Honestly, a lot of high-profile names that we're all very, very familiar with. So some of these names won't be, I think, as big of a shock as others. So I'm going to throw out some of the most obvious ones. Obviously, first and foremost, Chris Bryant. I think Chris Bryant, third baseman currently for the Chicago Cubs, he's been one of the biggest names tied to any trade rumors, I think, since going back to even the trade deadline. I mean, literally this past season, there was almost a deal made to send Chris Bryant over to Boston, and it fell through. I guess things didn't pan out, whatever might have happened. He's going to be traded eventually. I mean, the guy is going to be a free agent here before we know it. He's got a lot of talent, though. Sure, he's coming off a struggling 2020 year, but he's been a three-time All-Star. He's a former MVP. He's a former Rookie of the Year. And not to mention, he's batted above 270 every year except in 2020 in his career. So he's got a lot of talent, and I think a lot of teams would be very happy to have him at third base. He'll be a free agent in 2021. So if you think about it, if the Cubs want to get him off their payroll and not have to pay for this last year, I would ship him off. I would send him somewhere. I would try and get some prospects because, like I mentioned on one of my other shows, they're going through a rebuild, I think. I think the Cubs are going to be one of the teams that are going to go through a rebuild next. I think that they're going to go through kind of I don't want to say complete revitalization, but they're definitely going to clean house of a lot of guys that have been part of some really good teams, especially that 2016 World Series, which Chris Bryant was a part of. So I think that a lot of teams would be very happy to have Chris Bryant on their team, and I think the Cubs could really benefit from shipping him off to somebody that's got prospects that will allow them to maybe build for the future and look kind of down the road a little bit. He's got a solid glove, too, and I think that, honestly, the big kicker here is that he's got such a good bat. I mean, he's such a good hitter, and in the 6 years in the MLB, he's belted at least 25-plus home runs each year, except for, obviously, this past season, but a big-time home run hitter. Somebody that's going to have a big bat, a really good third baseman hitting player. I think that a lot of teams are going to want to have that. He's put up some pretty insane power numbers, too. I mean, 3 years out of the 6, he's been above 900 in OPS. So you've got power hitting, you've got really good fielding, you've got a lot of different pieces that I think a lot of teams would like, and a couple of teams that I think could trade for him, one of them being the Nationals. I know that the Nationals have already made a couple moves. They might want to try and go get another guy and that third base corner over for the Nationals is a little bit questionable, right? Carter Kieboom has been average. They've actually talked about, or at least the Reds have discussed, Eugenio Suarez being on the move, and so his name has been linked to the Nationals. But a third baseman could be in the future and kind of in the cards for the Nationals because I definitely think that they need to kind of clean up that left corner infield position a little bit because Kieboom, he batted around 200 this past year. He hasn't really turned out to, I think, become the player that they all expected him to in the organization. So the Nationals would definitely be in the running for Chris Bryant. And then the Dodgers. We all know Justin Turner is going to be, and he is currently a free agent this year. So they would probably love having Bryant in L.A. Not to mention, if they could go out and trade for Chris Bryant and they somehow, some way sign DJ LeMahieu, I mean, talk about a scary infield, right? I mean, you've got Max Muncy, DJ LeMahieu, Corey Seager or Chris Taylor, one of the two at short, and then you've got Chris Bryant over at third. So you would have a really, really good infield if you ask me. So one of those two teams I could see trading for him, and not to mention the Nationals have prospects that they could give up, and the Dodgers, they also have prospects that they could give up. So both teams could give something to the Cubs that they would definitely need, and both teams could probably pay Chris Bryant whatever he wanted them to pay him. And I think that, he's a guy that's not really that old, so he's got a lot of years left in him, so he's going to be a guy that he might be wanting to look for a long-term deal, trying to stay somewhere for a long time. Who knows how much money he'll want, and maybe he'll re-sign with the Cubs, but I honestly think that he's going to be on the move before the season even starts. And if he's not, he's definitely not going to be with the Cubs after 2021. Once he's a free agent, I don't see him coming back to Chicago. So that's my first guy that I think is going to be on the trading block soon. Joe Musgrove, another guy that I also think will be traded very, very soon, or at least in the next year or so, I would say. Starting pitcher for the Pittsburgh Pirates. He'd be a very interesting move for a lot of teams, I think. And Pittsburgh is he came over to Pittsburgh in that infamous trade that they made with the Astros to get rid of Garrett Cole. And in all honesty, Musgrove is a very steady, reliable starting pitcher. I would say next to Trevor Williams, he's been the Pirates' best starting pitcher over the last 3 years. He's not light years ahead of his his peers. He's not somebody that is going to be leaps and bounds better talent-wise than the other pitchers in the league. But he's somebody that could definitely, eventually, I would say, be a solid arm in any lineup. I mean, I think he'd be a really good kind of third person in a rotation. He reminds me a little bit of a lesser version of a Patrick Corbin, right? Somebody that's really good as like a third starter. Would never put him as your ace, would never put him as your second guy. Third or fourth guy down in the rotation, I could definitely see him being that type of key piece for a lot of teams that need pitching. And trust me, there's a lot of teams that need starting pitching. And he actually had a really good season this past year, too. So, in all honesty, his trade value would probably be pretty high. And if I'm the Pirates, I'm thinking, okay, I can get rid of this guy, probably the best that I can get rid of him for as of right now. And at this point of his career, I mean, this is the lowest that his ERA has been in his entire career. The 3 years before, or the 4 years before, I would say, his ERA never dipped below 4, and it's actually this year has been the first year that it dipped below 4 at 3.86 was a career low for him. So you could get some really good prospects for him, and you wouldn't have to worry about having to pay him because I know the Pirates are always trying to save money and trying to limit their spending on their payroll. So Joe Musgrove would be very interesting. He didn't have a stellar record this year, and I don't think that comes as a shock. I mean, he was pitching for the worst baseball team at the MLB. He was 1-5 with a record, but when you've got a 3.8 ERA and a 1-5 record, that screams no run support. And I think a lot of teams can see through that and say, okay, the guy himself has been pitching well. It's just that he needs to be on a team that's going to help him out, give him some run support, and then all of a sudden that 1-5 record can be flipped to 5-1 very, very quickly. So there's a lot of teams that want that solid starting pitching. He had a career high in 2019 in strikeouts with 157, so he's definitely on a good trend in his career. I would say some teams that are looking for him, maybe the Angels. I mean, I know that they are really struggling in the starting pitching position. I know that, I mean, Dylan Bundy was really the only thing that they had in a rotation as a starter that they could really rely on and go to. So Joe Musgrove, even though he'd probably still be the second, probably the second option there in all honesty, I think that he could still thrive in L.A. I think the Rangers would be another interesting team for him to go to. They got rid of Lance Lynn, so they're looking for another arm to kind of replace and fill. I know that they've gone out and gotten a little bit of relief help, so now they maybe want to balance it out with some starting pitching. The Twins, they are obviously, I think, looking for pitching too. I think, in all honesty, they've got good pitching as it is right now. I just question whether or not it is completely reliable, right? And I think that a lot of it does have to do with they don't have a definitive ace, in my opinion. I think that, I mean, obviously Kenta Maeda, he would probably be my definitive ace, but I think even Maeda on a lot of other teams, I don't know if he would be the ace. I mean, this year he had a great year. He had the MLB high or the MLB low in WHIP. I think it was at a .75. So he had and he was an AL Cy Young finalist. So I would say Maeda would be the main ace on that team. Then you've got, Randy Dobnak, who was really good to start and then kind of petered off at the end. So Musgrove could be kind of that bolstering, major glue that they could put on or put in this rotation to really kind of gel everything together. And I think the Twins would be a very interesting candidate for him. And then the Giants, I mean, they're always looking for starting pitching. I know that they got rid of Drew Smyly. They made a couple moves for their starters. They're going to be losing Jeff Samardzija. They're going to be losing some pitching eventually. So I would, if I'm the Giants, I'd say, hey, you know what? We could get Musgrove. Again, you wouldn't have to pay him a whole lot, but you could get a major bang for your buck because he could be really good on a really small contract, and he could be a huge beneficiary for a lot of different ball clubs. So Joe Musgrove is going to be another guy that I'm going to be watching very closely to see where he goes and if he is traded before the season starts. Another guy, Wilson Contreras, a second Cub, second of three players to already be mentioned. Two of them are Cubs. So the Cubs are really, I think, starting to clean house. I think they're really starting, because this has been a guy that's also slowly seen his name in the news and possibly around trade rumors. I know that actually, I believe the Angels were one of the teams that they were, conversating with in terms of making a deal for Wilson Contreras. So the Angels, I think, are on the verge of making a move or two that are going to really set themselves up nicely. I just think that they need to do it. That's all. But Wilson Contreras is a guy that I think a lot of players are going, or a lot of teams are going to want because of how unique of a player he is, because again, not many catchers are this good of hitters. I mean, he's got one of the highest OPSs amongst catchers since his debut in 2016, and he's coming off a career high in home runs in 2019. You know, he had back-to-back All-Star years in 2018 and 2019, and again, one of the highest OPSs amongst catchers since 2016. So somebody that has done a lot of damage in his early years in his professional baseball career. He's going to be a free agent in 2023. So his contract is going to be up. Another guy that is going to be a free agent on Chicago. So they could really start to see some guys start to leave and say, hey, we're not going to try and deal with your last year or your last 2 years on your contract. We're going to just ship you off, try and get some prospects, and we're going to rebuild for the future, because that's what we need to do. They've already showed it. They got rid of Yu Darvish. They've already talked about getting rid of Chris Bryant. So I think, and they've gotten rid of Kyle Schwarber. So I think it's starting to slowly, snowball for them a little bit here. And I think that if they can get rid of Contreras, some teams are going to have to probably pay a pretty hefty price. The guy's a really good catcher, and he's proved himself as being one of the really good catchers in the league. He had the most caught-stealing throwouts as a catcher in the league this year with 9. He didn't hit great, though. I mean, he hit below 250. Now, nobody on the Cubs hit well. I mean, it was a general consensus, I think, that nobody on Chicago really hit well. If I'm not mistaken, Jason Hayward was one of the better hitters on the team, and he has not been that good of a hitter since his rookie year in St. Louis. So I think a lot of guys, they're coming off this sluggish 2020, and I think a lot of teams are kind of looking past 2020 and saying, okay, what did they do in 2019? What did they do in 2018? Because those are better samples to go off of, because it's only 60 games, and it was such a weird, kind of discombobulated season. I don't think anybody was able to get really any sort of footing or sort of routine going, if you will. And he's had 3 straight years of over a 3 WAR. He's coming off a career-low 1 WAR. But again, a lot of guys did not have great 2020s. And so I think that there are teams that could definitely trade for him. One of them, the Red Sox. I immediately thought of them because Christian Vasquez, he's a solid catcher. He's a very solid catcher to have. I think he's going to eventually turn into a much better catcher as time goes on. He's young, and he's pretty new in the MLB. So the Cubs might say, hey, you know what, a project that we could work with? Here you go, Boston. You can definitely pay for Wilson. You can take his contract, and we're going to take Christian Vasquez, and we're going to develop him into the next Wilson Contreras. The Nationals, another team I think that could definitely benefit from having Wilson Contreras. I mean, Yan Gomes, he's getting older. I would not say that he's a starting catcher anymore. And then Kurt Suzuki, he's a free agent. So they're definitely going to be looking for a catcher. I actually have seen things where JT Realmuto's name has been linked to the Nationals. So that might be that, catcher and third base are 2 positions that the Nationals might really try and fill this offseason. And then the Astros, I threw them in there because I think that the Astros, I could see them trying to make a last-ditch effort to make a World Series run before everybody's a free agent in 2021 and 2022, and they start losing guys as time goes on. I mean, Jose Altuve, I believe, is one of the and Alex Bregman are the 2 guys on the team that have any sort of long-term deal still, because Carrera's going to be a free agent. George Springer's a free agent right now. Michael Brantley is a free agent right now, and there doesn't seem to be any sign of either one of those guys re-signing with Houston. Martin Maldonado had a horrendous year, and in all honesty, he's been one of the worst hitting catchers in baseball in the last 3-4 years. So they could go and try and make some sort of deal, try and get Wilson Contreras and say, hey, we'll pitch in, I don't know, they would probably throw maybe like a Yuli Gurriel or somebody that is going to be an up-and-coming player that's going to be good down the road, and then maybe some prospects that are get thrown into it, and they can really benefit from having Wilson in their lineup. So I think the Astros are probably the least of those 3 that are likely to have, any sort of desire to go after Wilson Contreras. But in all honesty, I could definitely see the Nationals or even, the Red Sox going after him. But we'll have to see where Contreras winds up. The next guy I want to talk about, Starling Marte, and this would be a very interesting move for the Marlins. I mean, they could, this would be very odd, I think, if they were to do this. I know that his name is floated around here and there. He was dealt at the trade deadline. He's got a club option. If I'm not mistaken, I think they decided to accept it, so he might still be playing with the Marlins this year. But again, they could maybe change their mind and say, we don't want to pay you this much. He's one of, I believe, 2 or 3 players on the entire Marlins team that will be making over $5 million this year. And an already low payroll team and coming off of a pandemic season, I don't know if that's really a smart move for them. Now, here's the other thing, though. They're kind of in this rebuild phase, and if they get rid of Marte, it might be a sign of them trying to go back to square one again. And it's kind of like, how many more times are we going to go back to square one? How many times is it going to take for you to just say, you know what, I'm going to bite the bullet, and I'm just going to go ahead and do it, and there's nothing you can do about it. I think that if they were to get rid of Marte, it would free up a lot of things in their outfield, so they would definitely have to go get some outfield prospects, and they'd have to go get some hitting. I mean, the biggest thing is he's got a great bat, and he's one of the only, I think, reliable hitters in that lineup that could actually do any sort of damage. Miguel Rojas, he's another guy that has done some pretty decent damage. He was, again, a very small sample size last year, only played about 20 to 30 games, had a really good year, though, but we don't really know what that's going to look like on a full season scale. I will say Marte's been successful the last couple of years. He's been an all-star, a two-time Gold Glove player, so he's somebody that can definitely field. He covers a lot of ground in center field. He's got a pretty good arm, too. So a lot of teams, I think, would really like having him. I would have to say, though, what concerns me is that his big drop-off from going from the Diamondbacks to the Marlins. He was batting .311 before he went to Miami, and then it dipped down to .245 once he arrived in Miami. He has had back-to-back years hitting 20-plus homers in 2018 and 2019. So he's a good, solid, power-hitting center fielder. He's a guy that is a good, solid fielder as well, and I think that even though he's owed a lot of money, I think similar to Musgrove, you don't have to pay a whole arm, leg, and then some for Marte. I think that you can get away with maybe paying, a couple million here, a couple million there for a 2 or 3 year deal, and he could really benefit a team that might say, hey, we've got this little window and we want to try and capitalize on it. Teams that I thought could maybe trade for him, Astros, obviously. I think that, again, they're really freed up in the outfield right now with Springer and with Brantley gone, so they're going to be in the business for an outfielder, I think, and I think that Marte would be very ideal for them. And then the Rays. I think that the Rays could be an interesting land for him because, you've already got Randy Arozarena, then you got Starling Marte, Kevin Kiermaier, but that's the thing, is Kevin Kiermaier's already in center, so what are you going to do with Marte? Maybe you move guys around, put somebody at the DH, who knows, but he's a player that I think the Rays would really like to have because, again, he's not going to probably be worth a whole bunch because you could argue that, hey, you didn't have a great year when you came to Miami, so, we have to kind of take that into consideration, A, and B, he's not one of the top-tier players. He can be up there. I just think that his desire and his will to win and play is a little bit in question, and I think that sometimes it's more of a lackadaisical thing with him, and he just doesn't feel like playing sometimes. You can kind of tell that his body language at times is not great, so I think a lot of teams could probably pick out little things like that, could say, hey, we're not going to pay you that much, but we'll pay you a good bit because you can play. So wherever he lands, I think it's going to be, oddly enough, a big-time benefit for that team. Now, the next player I want to discuss, Brandon Crawford, I briefly mentioned him in a previous segment because he's going to be a free agent in 2022, and he's getting old. I mean, he's in his mid-30s, and he's clearly on a little bit of a career decline. Although he was an all-star in 2018, his average has dipped down each and every single year steadily from 2016 on. I would say the last time he batted 270 or higher was in 2016-2015. So he's definitely on kind of a downward trend in his career. Not a huge bat. He's got a great glove at shortstop, so if a team is looking for a reliable veteran fielder that can come up big in at-bats in certain situations, and has also been around winning ball clubs, he's been on World Series winning teams, I think then that would definitely appeal to a lot of teams that might have some younger players, that might have some guys that need some tutelage, some veteran leadership, and that's what Crawford, I think, would definitely bring. He's owed $15 million this year, so somebody would have to really fork over a lot of money for a guy that's getting pretty old, and that is definitely on a decline in his career, but he's a decent shortstop, I would say. He's a pretty solid shortstop, not nearly as good as he was probably 5 years ago, but he's still somebody that could definitely see some value in. The Athletics, I could see them trading for him because Marcus Semien, he's a free agent this year, and they definitely want to try and fill that void over at shortstop. And not to mention, you could probably get a bargain for him, and you wouldn't have to pay for a whole lot. And the Athletics, they would probably have to give up some prospects, so that might hurt them a little bit, but I could definitely see them potentially doing that. And then the Marlins, that's another team. I know Miguel Rojas kind of occupies that, left side of the infield a little bit, but Brandon Crawford could play second. He's a versatile middle infielder. He can play both. And I think that, again, the Marlins, they don't want to have to pay anybody a whole bunch of money, so maybe they don't go after him because $15 million, they're already having to pay Starling Marte quite a bit, so I don't know if they're going to want to pay Brandon Crawford that much also. But that would be another interesting team because they have a lot of young talent. They have got a lot of young guys that are coming up through the ranks that could need some veteran leadership, that could need some tutelage, like from Brandon Crawford. So a very interesting case that Brandon Crawford is, because I don't really know where he'll wind up or if he'll go anywhere, but definitely by 2022, the shortstop position is going to be pretty wide open for the San Francisco Giants. Next guy, that's, again, he's kind of similar to Chris Bryant. You see his name in trade rumors all the time, every single year, Josh Hader. And I see why, because I feel like he will eventually become a closer that is going to want a lot of money, and he plays on a team like the Milwaukee Brewers. That's a middle market, and they're not going to pay a whole bunch of money for a closer or for a back-end reliever, right? He did have a career-high ERA this year at 3.79, so his ERA was a little bit higher than normal, but it was still under 4, and it's never gone higher than 4 in his career. And the years before that, it's all been below 3. So for 3-4 straight years, it was all 2, 2.5, 2.4, and hovered around that. He went to back-to-back All-Star games in 2018, 2019. He had a league-high 13 saves in the NL this past season. So he's definitely, again, a guy that would have a lot of value for a lot of teams. He's had 130-plus Ks in the last 2 seasons. He's worked in 75 and 2/3 innings and had 138 Ks in 2019, I believe. So again, the guy is efficient. He gets through innings very quickly, and he throws a lot of heat. He has no problem blowing it by you. And I think that teams that are looking for those hard-throwing closers to really shut down late-inning situations, they could really go after him. You know, his strikeout efficiency was at an all-time high this past season, and his whip in his career has been incredible, a .86 whip. So the guy literally allows no base runners on base, which is a very, again, beneficial thing to have as a closer. Now, I could see maybe the Angels, again, making a trade for him. You know, they definitely need the bullpen help big time, and Hader would clearly fix that issue. The Mets, another team that are looking for bullpen help, because I think they've addressed just about every need that they want, but they could definitely go after some bullpen pitching. And then the Phillies, I mean, without question, the Phillies had literally the worst bullpen ERA in 90 years, for the last 90 years in the MLB. So, I mean, this past season was literally a milestone and not a good one for the Phillies. So they could definitely be in the business for a reliever and for a closer like Hader. But wherever he lands, if he does wind up getting traded, I honestly wouldn't be shocked if he didn't get traded, because, again, his name's just thrown out there all the time. So you never know what to believe on that. But I'm going to say Hader is another one. And then getting into the next guy, really the last guy that I would say who could be on the move is Jock Peterson. And if we remember, going back in the summertime, Jock Peterson was going to be traded. There was a deal that was made to have him go to the Angels. It wound up falling through. And I would say that he shut the Dodgers up real quick this past offseason with having slugging over 500 in the playoffs. He played really well. I mean, he's not a great fielder at all, and I think that his overall hitting kind of comes into question. He's a great power hitter, but in terms of his overall hitting, it's not really that great. But I think that it will be another guy that will be at the heart of a lot of trade conversations because of the previous summer, and kind of, I think there's this elephant in the room, if you will, that they want him gone, and he might want to be gone as well. And he's been a good power hitter, no question. I mean, again, he had that incredible display of home run hitting in the home run derby a couple years ago against Vlad Jr. And then in the last, 3 of the last 5 years, his OPS has been above 800, and he's had 3 years of over 120 OPS plus. So his numbers have been pretty solid over the last couple years. He's a big-time home run hitter. 2019, he had 36 home runs. It was a career high for him, and he had a career high in RBIs with 70 plus. So the guy's on a good trend. Again, a lot of these guys are on good trends, and I think that's what makes them ideal trade value, because then other teams can say, hey, you know what, they're in a right time in their career, they're peaking right, we can give teams good prospects for the future, and then we can capitalize if we're trying to go all in this year and thinking, or in a win-now mode, as they call it. And so teams that are in this win-now mode, they might want to go after a power hitter like Jock Peterson. I will say, though, if the DH does not go universal, it's going to limit where he goes. I don't see him being traded to a team that needs an outfielder. I could see him maybe going to the Angels again. I could see that kind of getting rehashed again and being brought back up and being brought back to fruition almost. And then another team that, if the DH does go to universal, is the Giants. They had one of the worst overall OPSs in DH hitters this past season. So they clearly need some power hitting. So those are two teams, plus you stay in the West Coast, he stays in the same state, so I don't think he'd be too upset about that. But ultimately, I could see him being on the move. Maybe not necessarily before the season, but at some point or another, I could definitely see him being dealt. But those are just a couple guys that I felt are going to be traded at one point or another. When, I don't know, but I think that we'll see them on the move sooner rather than later. So that'll do it for this segment, folks. Again, thanks for sticking around as always, but stay right there because we'll be right back after this commercial break for the final segment today, where I will get into my buy it or deny it segment, and I'll discuss whether or not I buy or deny the idea that over 50% of teams in the MLB will have fans in the stands this upcoming summer. So don't go anywhere, everyone. We've got a really great last segment coming at you because we're always going to have a lot of fun here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup final.
Listen now.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for the final segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenhour is still with you. And in the previous segment, I discussed which players are the most likely trading pieces that could get moved before the season starts, and which teams would be great fits, honestly, for those players. Now, I want to wrap up today's show discussing my buy it or deny it segment, and today's buy it or deny it is going to be whether or not I buy or deny the claim that over 50% of teams in the MLB will have fans in the stadiums this season. Now, as we know, there's all this news coming out about the vaccine and that it's on its way out and that, people are actually starting to get administered it. I've actually had friends and friends of friends and people that I know that are in the health field. Actually, my girlfriend, she's in the health field. She may be getting it herself. So there's a lot of people that are starting to get it now. But the question is going to be, how many people are going to actually be able to have access to it that are actually going to get it? And if, after those two questions, the next one's going to be, what are you going to do if the people that come to the game are not vaccinated? There's going to be a lot of things that are going to be going on, right? And I think that first and foremost, every single MLB team is probably going to have to follow the state regulations and what is going to be followed. And as of right now, there's very few states that are allowing fans in the stands. I know that if it's an outdoor venue, it's going to be a little bit different because it's outside as opposed to being inside like at a hockey game or at a basketball game. But you still have to remember that some of these states are still very, very, very strict. I know here in Pennsylvania, there's no way that they would have fans in the stands. And again, in maybe, places like Texas, that's why they had the World Series there. They were able to have fans there. So it's places like that. Maybe places like Florida. I know that the laws in Florida are very lenient with the virus right now. Maybe other places like Arizona. But in all honesty, I don't see how over 50% of teams could wind up having fans in the stands this season. Now, if you were to ask me that question at this point next year in 2022, yeah, totally different story because by then the vaccine would probably have been rolled out. It probably would have been administered already. People would already have it. And from everything I've heard is that we'll be back to at least somewhat or close to it full normalcy by 2022. So I think that that's going to be, this is going to be a very odd season. I think it's going to be some teams are going to have fans, some teams are not going to have fans. But then the other question is going to be, how many fans are going to be allowed? What is the setup going to be like? Is it going to be very similar to how the World Series was? I mean, I remember a couple episodes that I discussed ago, and I shared, my opinion of kind of, whether or not fans will even be in the stands this year at all, just in general. And I had mentioned that I have a friend of mine who went to the World Series this past year. He's a big Rays fan. And I asked him, I said, what was that like? What was it like going to a game right now during this kind of nightmare that we're living in? And he said, honestly, it was pretty, he said it was pretty strict. He said it wasn't crazy strict, but there were definitely people wearing masks, but then there was a lot of people that weren't wearing masks. He said you were definitely spread out. It was very, very spaced out. So, you had to buy tickets in pods of 4. So basically just 4 straight seats. That's how you bought the seats. And then it was spaced out, I think he said by about 6 to 8 feet, maybe even further. So you're definitely going to have some teams that are going to make a little bit of money back this year in ticket sales, but probably not a whole lot. And then the next question is going to be, how much are those tickets going to sell? And there's a lot of kind of questions that come after that initial question, right? Especially with what we're going through. Because if you say, okay, Fans are going to be allowed. Well, how many fans? This amount of fans. Okay, well, how are they going to be spaced out? This is how they'll be spaced out. Okay, how many tickets are you going to be willing to sell? At what price are you going to be willing to sell those tickets? And you also have to remember, a lot of people have not been working. So people might not want to pay astronomical fees. For example, I'll just throw out a random team. Let's say the Kansas City Royals, a team that's not a huge market. They were not very good this past year. And from what I understand, I believe the Chiefs are allowing fans into their stands, or at one point or another they were. So my question is this. Kansas City then goes ahead and says, okay, we'll allow fans at Kauffman Stadium for the Royals games, no problem. Are you going to jack the prices up for a Royals baseball game just trying to make some money back in your pocket? Because in all honesty, some of these MLB teams, I think they need to be mindful of how much they're charging for these tickets, because it could deter people from going, and they could say, hey, I don't want to go. I haven't been working in a year. Why would I want to pay a whole $60 more just to cover somebody's bottom line from last year, and their team is terrible? That would make no sense. Same thing with, like, the Pirates, for example. Why would you go and pay, usually for Pirates games, what I've paid in the past, and I've been living in Pittsburgh for quite some time now, I would say I've paid at the most for Pirates tickets, maybe $50, maybe. Usually, and I've actually had a friend of mine who worked for the Pirates for a little bit, so he was able to give me free tickets at times, but for the most part, you're paying around $20 to $30 per ticket, and that's after the service fees. So really, the ticket itself is about $10, $15 to go to a Pirates game. Great deal. And again, you're not seeing incredible baseball, but it's a great stadium, beautiful view, and who knows who's going to be in town that weekend or that week or that day, and it could be kind of a good team to watch. So you could get a bargain of going and seeing great professional baseball, a solid opponent, and a beautiful stadium. It turns out to be a great evening. But now this year, if they do allow fans back in the stands at PNC Park, there's no way that they could charge $60 for just, general admission tickets, or $70 or $80, and that's the lowest it starts, because nobody's going to pay that. Nobody in their right mind here in the city of Pittsburgh would pay money to go watch one of the worst teams in baseball, who barely were able to win double-digit games this year, and pay $70. It would make no sense. So I think that teams allowing fans in the stands, they have to be very, very careful with that this year, because they can't jack the prices up. They have to be careful about the spacing and the spreading. Not to mention, here's another thing. What happens if an outbreak does occur? So let's say that there was a huge outbreak amongst fans at the stands or at the game or whatever, and something is reported to the team, and then all of a sudden they shut that down. Are they going to just keep on? Are they going to keep on with fans? Are they going to nix the fans' idea? I mean, could the fans be, fans being allowed at stadiums kind of become a slow ushering and kind of reintroducing into a normal game day experience? But then could it be taken away because fans aren't following those protocols? But then my next question is, are there going to be preset protocols that fans are going to have to follow before they go to the game? Bringing a COVID-19 negative test, quarantining for 3 days, and being able to then go. Are you going to have to wear your mask when you go? What are going to be the ins and outs to this setup in order to kind of get back to somewhat of a normal sense, right? I mean, are they going to be willing to make these requirements for people, and maybe some people might feel very uncomfortable towards doing it. Some people might feel uncomfortable getting the vaccine and saying, I don't want to get the vaccine just to go to a baseball game. But then there's other people that will say, I'll get the vaccine to go to a baseball game. I don't care. I just want to go to a baseball game. Me personally, I'm the type that's saying, hey, if I can get the vaccine, great, because if that's my ticket to normalcy and that's my ticket to not have to wear a mask and not have to do all this social distancing and, we can go back to normal life again, fine, so be it. Whatever. I've had friends and some other friends of friends have gotten the vaccine, and they've said that they feel fine. I mean, their arm hurts, but your arm hurts after you get a flu shot. So it's nothing crazy. It's nothing, scary, I would say. But again, I know that there's a lot more to it with how it was rushed out and this, that, and the other. But then that goes back to the original point of, is that going to become a requirement? And if so, is it going to also deter people from going to games, just like paying an astronomical fee to go to baseball games for really bad teams just to cover teams' bottom lines that they missed from last year? That's going to be a big conversation. What are we going to do about people's requirements in trying to get into the gates? Is that going to be a requirement? I just think that it's very hard for over 50% of the MLB teams to have fans in the stands. I just think that's going to be really, really challenging to do. I could see, again, teams like maybe the Diamondbacks, the Rangers and the Astros, the Marlins and the Mets, or excuse me, the Marlins and the Rays, the Braves maybe. I'm trying to think, the Royals, I could potentially see them doing that. Very few teams, I think, are going to be able to even have fans. And again, it's going to go back to the state requirements. What are the state laws? Is that allowed? Are outdoor venues of sporting events allowed? If so, how many people are allowed? And I really do. There's so many questions to this. There's so many underlying layers to this overall arching theme and what we're going through right now that I don't think people really realize that it goes past, okay, well, what if there's an outbreak? Well, what about even just getting people into the stands at first and, trying to convince people, because there are a lot of people that are probably going to be very weary of going back into large crowd gathering places in the fear of getting something. Who knows what it could be? It could be COVID. It could be anything. This fear of potentially contracting some sort of virus in a large crowd. It's going to probably have some sort of effect on some people. I think there are going to be other people also that are going to be in the mindset that say, you know what? You can get sick getting anything. You could anything. It's a calculated risk in anything that you do. I'm not going to allow it to control my life. I'm going to go to this game. So be it. So you're always going to have that one side or the other. There's always going to be two sides of the coin. And I just am really curious to see, what Rob Manfred does, right? What is Rob Manfred going to do? Is he going to step in and is he going to play the part of the commissioner, or is he going to just kind of leave everything into the hands of everybody else? Everybody else's responsibility, not his. And again, I was very critical of Rob Manfred this past summer, and I feel like I'm going to be critical of him again this summer because I just feel like he's a very passive commissioner who is not concerned about issues like this and taking disciplinary actions towards teams and players. And I can already see, again, I briefly mentioned it in the first segment, and I'll touch on it now a little bit more. Let's say that you've got a team like the Marlins, and they don't allow masks in the stadium. They say, no, you don't have to wear a mask or whatever. And there's, some of these teams, it's already like social distancing because they don't get any fans in the stands. So it would make no difference to them. And the Marlins, they're one of those teams. If you got a team like that, and let's say, guys on the Miami Marlins, they go out, whatever, they have a, whatever. They go out and do their own thing, and then they come back, they contract it. Now the players potentially have it, and if it's a player that gets it, and then they're breathing the air, there's no masks, and then it's getting filtered around. I mean, it's an indoor stadium in Miami, so then the air's just going to go around and around and around. It could also get to other people, too. And I think that could become another whole issue in itself of if they can do the contact tracing and it goes back to a player on the team and he wasn't wearing a mask and all these fans were wearing masks, it could become a serious issue. Fans could become very, very angry about that, and they could say, well, he was irresponsible. I'm coming after you, and I'm coming after the team, and I'm coming after the ownership. So there's a lot of issues that could come with having fans in the stands. I'm not saying that I don't want it. I would obviously love to have fans back in the stands. I would love to be able to go back to a baseball game. I was actually talking with a good friend of mine not too long ago, and I told him, I said, man, I really hope that we can go back to Pirates games this year. I really hope that we can go back, even if, if we can only go to a couple, because usually, right, the summer before 2020 and 2019, I went to probably about 10 to 12 Pirates games because the tickets were so dirt cheap, and it's just something to do. You don't even wind up watching the game half the time. So I think that, if we can only go to 2, if we can only go to 3, fine, but it's better than nothing, right? I mean, this past whole year, the last time I went to a professional or collegiate sporting event live in person was to go see a Kentucky men's basketball game I have no idea. I can't even, about a year ago. Really, seriously, about a year ago. And so I think that people are itching to get back to normalcy, but I think that there's also has to be some sort of carefulness taken about this. There has to be some sort of parameters set, some sort of protocols, some sort of measures taken to make sure that there isn't any sort of issues that could, again, I hate to say this, but let's just be honest here. Okay, this is what people are afraid of. It's the lawsuit. Nobody, I don't think, obviously people are afraid of getting sick and people dying. That is obviously first and foremost. That goes without saying. But the next biggest worry, again, going back to the point of, okay, if the Marlins get let's say there's an outbreak on the Marlins, and they don't know that until after the game, and nobody was wearing a mask, and they had fans in the stands, and no fans were wearing the masks, and it's inside, and the air was, again, not going anywhere, it was just staying in that enclosed area, a fan could get the idea of saying, hey, I got sick from this because of their irresponsibility, I'm going to come after the team. I'm going to sue the team. And that was, again, the biggest issue, the liability issue of it. That's been the whole problem this whole year of if we have fans in the stands and somebody contact, trace it back to here, now we're going to have a huge, huge, huge issue on our hands. And we already have to deal with a lot of financial issues as it is. So there might be teams that say, you know what? We're going to just keep it safe and keep it simple, and we're not going to have fans. We're going to just, once there is enough people to get vaccinated, and once there's been enough people that have been vaccinated and that there's proven fact of that, then we will talk about maybe allowing at a limited capacity, and then as time goes on, back to full normalcy. I think if I had rephrased this topic and said, in this buy it or deny it, if I had rephrased it and I said, by middle of the season, we could see over 50% of the teams having fans in the stands, I would maybe buy it a little bit more. But in all honesty, I'm going to deny this. I'm going to deny the claim that there's going to be over 50% of teams that have fans in the stands this year. I just simply can't see that. I can't see over 15, 16, 17 teams, upwards of 20 teams deciding, hey, we're going to have fans in the stands. I do not see that happening. I just can't see it occurring, especially, look at New York, right? The Mets, there's no way they're going to have fans. The Yankees, no way. Red Sox, no way. Baltimore, the Nationals have talked about it. I don't know if they're going to actually do that or not, but teams like, maybe the Cubs, or the White Sox, who knows if they'll have fans in the stands. Out in L.A., the Dodgers, the Angels, the Giants, the Padres, these teams, they might not have fans in the stands. So I'm going to deny this claim. I don't see it happening. Maybe by the middle of the summer, we'll see a little bit more of teams going and getting fans in the stands and ushering that back in. But for the start of the season, I really don't see many teams doing it. Maybe a couple, but not many. But anyways, whenever this day comes where we can go back to games, I've said this a million times, I sound like a broken record, but it's just because I am absolutely itching and beside myself to just go and see a major league or just any professional live sporting event, because I'm really sick and tired of just sitting on my couch watching the game. I know everybody loves the comfort of their own home, and it's great, don't get me wrong. But being at the game, being at the ballpark, being in the stadium, the arena, whatever, there's just something about the live sports, and I just don't know, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to answer it, but there's just something about it that makes it so complete as a fan, as a viewer, as a journalist, as a podcaster, as a broadcaster, whatever, as somebody that is around and loves sports. There's just something about, and I've talked to people in the industry, and they say it all the time, there's just nothing like being there in person at the ballpark, at the stadium, in the arena on game day. You just cannot replace that. And I think that's a very true statement. I don't think it'll ever get replaced, and hopefully we can get back to some normalcy, because if so, I already know that I'm going to be trying to get the quickest and the fastest PNC Park Pirates tickets this upcoming summer so I can catch, even if it's not great baseball, still some baseball. But that'll wrap it up for us here today, folks. Thanks again for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice little review. That really helps us out. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we'd really appreciate that. And as always, folks, really appreciate you joining today. Thanks again, and have a great day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.